This is front page 94.7, The Pulse in Geelong, and as suggested before the break, we're going to talk migration. Melanie McFarlane, she's been on before, very passionate advocate in this space, and I think she might just have a little spring in her step. I shouldn't put words in her mouth. She might be a bit excited with a change of government. Melanie McFarlane, good morning. Welcome to The Pulse.
Good morning, Rob. Thank you very much for having me on.
There have been issues that have concerned you about our migration situation over the last few years. COVID certainly was a logical one for things stopping, but there have been other sort of roadblocks that for you, I know when we chatted last, it was concerning you a little, but are you thinking there might be a little bit more clear air with a change of government, even though the slow wheels might mean it's months away, but at least some optimism?
Yes, actually. I wore red yesterday, and I think that must have meant something. In perhaps a little bit of celebration, just in the sense that, well, firstly, I mean, the elections are over, and immigration is such a political hotcake, so it's really nice that it's over and done with, and now the new government can just get on with things. And I really hope that, given there's such a large backlog of visas in the pipeline, that they can just move on with this. And I'm very hopeful because during the campaign they did express that they wanted to have more people going to permanent residence as opposed to so many temporary visa holders. So if they can hold that promise and assist more people who have been contributing to the country throughout COVID, such as the refugees, such as the international students, with further pathways to permanent residence to also help the country with the current skill shortage that we seem to be encountering, that would be fantastic.
Have you been able to collect enough really strong data to see where the major shortage of skill is?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I seem to go back to hospitality because I know that currently in the recruitment space, 24% of jobs that are vacant are in that area. So I think that's interesting. It's no coincidence that we've had 2 years of borders being closed, and hospitality, whilst obviously, there's always debate about wages being raised and so on, it can be a bit of a transient industry, and it's one that international students will naturally go into, and also working holiday visa makers and so on. And so that I would definitely say that is one area.
The
areas too.
The conversation certainly been about the Billawa family heading home. I don't know. I presume that you would be probably excited about that, but some people still concerned it's the thin edge of the wedge and it'll open up all sorts of issues. Do you think, contrary to that it might be just good for everyone's morale? Because I think 95% of Australians would be very much in favour of that horrible saga coming to an end.
Yes, I agree, Rob. I think, it's time for a bit of heart and humanity, and that's what I would hope that we are going to see now more with this party in power. And I don't see why you can't have that whilst also ensuring that the economy is doing what it needs to do at this time. So, yes, definitely. And the reality is, as I constantly say, that refugees are such contributors to the Australian economy, and there are even statistics within the Department of Home Affairs website that echo exactly that sentiment.
And that sentiment's been echoed louder even this week with a new Member of Parliament being one of those aforementioned refugees. That story, I don't know how many people are aware of it, but I guess for someone in the space that you work in, was that just a real personal, warm and fuzzy feel?
Yeah, it's a beautiful story. It's absolutely heartwarming, and it summarizes, really encapsulates everything that myself and other advocates in this space are constantly talking about. Somebody who's come through that whole process, and now they themselves are going to be working for Australian citizens to support them, and that's what normally happens with people like refugees who come through that whole process and go through all of that hardship, that they are enormously grateful for what they have received from Australia, and they want to give back. And so it's a wonderful example of that.
It sort of came home to me when there was a comment made from Darlie, is the name of the new politician, remembering as if it was yesterday, lying back in that boat, floating in the ocean, hoping for a new life. That's just brings at home how horrible the circumstances must be for so many, and how in those days a warm and embracing Australia has made such a difference to so many people's lives. And again, to back up your comments, the gratitude that those people have and the contribution they've made to Australian society.
That's exactly right. And it is a wonderful, warm feeling. And I just very much hope that we can come back to being that receptive nation that Australia in former times has been, and create that sense of unity, which in the end creates abundance, which means, a good economy, and everybody can be living in the way in which they deserve to be able to live. I really have a strong optimistic sense about the present and the future now in Australia.
Melanie, just on that, we talked about new government and changes, but where you sit, it might take a little while for things to change and wheels to turn, but what are the first important things that need to change for you to be comfortable that a new dawn is opening?
Well, in all honesty, Rob, I mentioned at the beginning of this interview that it's very important to start getting visas approved. There is an enormous backlog within the Department of Home Affairs, which you would be surprised at in a way, because you would have hoped that with the 2 years of borders being closed, a lot could have been finalised. A lot of partner visas were finalised. And yet, in these last few months since borders have been opened, there obviously has been an enormous influx of applications. And not only are many of them being slow to finalise these applications, but there's been quite a lot of visas refused, such as student visas, coming from areas like LATAM, where I work with a lot. My husband's Colombian. We have offices in Colombia, bringing students over from there. And there's been a lot of refusals in that space, which seems a little crazy when I know the government previously has been pushing for diversity in the international student space. I think that's also a little bit because of new case officers who are perhaps not so trained, and they're taking very literally this requirement that students need to prove that they will come to Australia to study and then leave immediately afterwards, which is not always realistic. Other countries don't have it.
Do you sense that previously there may have been a little lack of appetite to speed things up, or is it being understaffed or underskilled in this area of the visa assessments?
Honestly, I believe the former, the first point you made, is very pertinent to all of this. I think that I really believe it was a soft border opening in February. Things have been slowed down because of the elections coming up and not having too many people coming in, perhaps, I don't know, COVID numbers increasing or what have you. It's, it's always a political hot potato. So immigration. And so I think a lot of it has been deliberate, but the problem with that is that it's slowed down so much now. I also think there is a staff shortage. Talking to somebody in government the other day, there definitely is a staff shortage there. And so with that as well, and having deliberately slowed things down, they are definitely in a mess, frankly, a bureaucratic mess, and so the new government needs to really sort that out, and fast.
In your role, would you describe yourself as a lobbyist for this cause? And if so, does a change of a set of ears for you to talk to likely to make things change quickly?
Yes, Rob, I would definitely consider myself a lobbyist in this space. I'm so passionate about immigration, being originally, I suppose, a migrant myself, but mostly because I see people all the time that I assist through my business who just make such incredible contributions to Australia in all kinds of space, like engineering, IT, childcare, aged care, all of these industries. And so having a new set of ears to speak to who we have been talking to during this time that can now really implement some of the things we've been talking about and asking for, is actually very exciting.
Yeah, I think Australia is. I mentioned before to our previous guest, there is an air of excitement, and I think it doesn't matter which side of the fence you're on, a change is good. It opens up opportunities, and everyone will want their little piece of the pie. There'll be a lot of other lobbyists with lots of other causes like yourself that will be wanting a fresh set of ears as well. So it probably will take a bit of time to get things going. One of the other concerns that hasn't been talked about much, it was lost in the election, is we still have a very serious effect of COVID in our community. Some very high numbers still of infections and our death rates. We've lost more Australians this year than we had in the previous two. With an increase in migrant influx, you even mentioned it yourself that it may be a concern. Is it a concern for you just to make sure that this is all bedded down properly and people are still well aware of the risk of the virus spread?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting question because you're right. It was lost completely in the elections, almost like COVID never existed in many respects. Health is always so important and pertinent. I think the issue is with Australia, because we were shut down for so long, unfortunately, with opening up, and then suddenly people are exposed where they weren't before, whereas other countries have just done it as they went along without the closing down part. And, who knows which is the better solution in the end. But the reality is in so many other countries, the rate of infections is actually less because they opened up and because they continued. And I suppose that perhaps they've got a bit more herd immunity than we've been able to build up here in Australia. And so in that regard, actually, I mentioned my husband's Colombian, and we talk about the rate of infection there. It's very, very low now. And so in many ways, the migrants coming in, I don't see them as posing that threat, perhaps, in bringing in more infections. And I also believe in the end it's something that we just need to learn to live with. And constant fear in our system is not good for us either. It's not good for our health. And so, yes, it is definitely about balance. But yes, those are just the points that I would bring up.
The industry closest to my heart is agriculture, and I know we've always screaming for people to come in for fruit picking and general agricultural work. I know my nephew runs a shearing contracting business, and the lack of ability for the New Zealand shearers to come into Australia caused some major chaos. One of those concerns that we've spoken about before is some ne'er-do-wells who are likely to try and cash in on this with I suppose managing migrants and operating them in less than favourable conditions. Is that something that you're able to manage better from your end over the years after being exposed to it more?
Well, that's interesting, and I know that, the Australian strategy for international education actually talked about, exploitation of international students and wanting to really look at that. It's not just international students, I know, but who work in agriculture. There's some come through, and there's been some ruses where people coming in on tourist visas have then worked in that area and been exploited also. I think that's something that we need to look at increasingly. I know there's a new agricultural visa that has come through. What I really sense is that there needs to be responsibility and obligations put onto the employer in terms of being able to employ on visas in that area, which there has been in the past. But I think that's something that needs to be continued. And if you have too many individual visa holders, like we have in a sense with the COVID-19 visas that are still in place that were given for this pandemic to allow people, such as students, for example, to then work full-time and not have to study any longer. We need to have a look at those as well, because those in turn could encourage exploitation if employers don't have that responsibility of having some kind of sponsorship and are beholden to the government in terms of how they treat migrant workers.
Yeah, the ability to infiltrate the exploitation market to get to the people who are doing the wrong thing, is that improving, or do they still operate under a bit of a shadow?
It is improving because something that COVID has done, I could pretty agree, Rob, it's just made things so much more transparent. And so these employers definitely have come out of the woodwork, and many of them have been exposed, actually. But I do believe, whilst I am an optimist, I am a realist as well, and I think it is still a work in progress. It definitely needs to continue. But social media has helped these types of issues where migrants who find themselves in that position, they get the word out. And so that particular employer gets a bad name for themselves quite quickly. And, so I think that is helpful also. There are more and more organisations. I do pro bono work, for example, for the Redfern Legal Centre. I know they do some work in that space. But there are many organisations who are very much onto this. And I do sense that Labor, having just come into power, will definitely be looking at this space more as well.
There might be just a hint of cynicism, but I detect a little spring in your step, as I said at the start. There's a bit more hope and optimism for the future. How long do you think you'll need to get a handle on whether the improvement that you hope for will be achievable? So is it a 6-month thing?
Yes, I was just thinking it's at least 6 months. Definitely. I would say, because there are enormous backlogs right now, and it's going to take at least that time to shift some of those. I would say 6 to 12 months, but I would hope with the student visas that over this next 6-month period we can see things coming through much faster. And I'm really excited about that. I definitely do have a spring in my step.
Yeah, no, that's good. And we probably should talk halfway through about August, September and see how things are tracking. But I really look forward to having a conversation with you in late November or early December, and we'll see if that confidence in your voice now is resonated into fact, because Australia's going to be better off for it. There's no doubt if we can get it right. And I just agree, like you, I think there's a little bit more appetite for absorbing this at this stage. So fingers crossed. Melanie McFarlane, thank you so much again for your time. Good luck with your projects. I know your passion is just oozing out every time we chat to you, and I hope that your continuing work and advocacy in this space can make the difference needed.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Rob. Thanks again for having me on.
It's a pleasure. We'll talk again soon. Melanie McFarlane, she is doing some really good work in this space. Married to a Colombian, and she's lived and breathed this. She's been overseas a lot in her life, but also has wonderful stories of how immigration, refugees, migrants of all sorts make a significant difference to the culture of Australia. And I think we're really starting to see it now with so many more new Australians entering in the Parliament this time. It's just really exciting. It's